When it comes to working with data contexts, it's important to understand the way data contexts form a scoping mechanism. So as I described before, you can set the data context at a window level. You just set the data context property on that window object to some source data object, and that becomes the ambient data source for all of the child elements within that window. However, you can also set a data context at a more granular level. So in this example, I could set a data context for the data grid and the data entry form below it to a collection of customers. And that ambient source of data is just applying to those elements based on some containing element that we set the data context on. And any bindings within that scope by default are going to be using that data context as their source objects. Now, when it comes to data-bound list controls, it's important to realize that they will dynamically set a data context of their own. A data grid, for example, as it goes and renders out each row is composed of a set of child elements. And what it will do is set the data context for the container of those child elements to the object that it's rendering out, the row object. So in this case, this is a grid full of orders. The overall data context is going to be a collection of orders, but the data context for each row is going to be an individual order object. And that means the bindings on the columns themselves, for example, can just bind to the properties of a single order object. They don't have to know which particular order object they're rendering out. You can also set a data context in a more granular fashion to a set of elements, and you would do that by setting the data context property on some containing element, such as a grid or stack panel. Then, as discussed before, that data context flows down to all child elements. That means these individual text boxes will have that data context as a customer object in this case, and they can just data bind to the properties on that customer object without needing to know about what the data context is for the rest of the form. And finally, you could set it for an individual element. It's fairly rare that you would set data context at that granular of level, although I will do it in the demos just to show how it works.